Thanks for joining us again today. And today's topic is really probably one of the most popular and one of the reasons that the L series of the Slims are actually really popular for dual battery setup is because just on the back of an expo we recently did, the customers are telling us, oh, we looked at a dual battery, but geez, it's expensive and you had to do this, that, and have to get the car in and do a lot of work to it and so on. And the quote's $3,500 to $5,000 for a dual setup. Well, that's typical and that's normal. That's not exorbitant, but that's typically what you'd pay. But what are your options? And again, if you wanted to pay more, if you wanted to have any sort of diagnostics, like if you want to have a battery monitor in the dash or something that runs off the battery, then it's going to cost you another couple of $1,000s. So between $3,500 and $7,000 is not unusual and it's quite typical. Anyone that's done it will know. So what are the different options you have? So these L series here, which are lithium, are lightweight, portable and easy to move. So these are the ones here, 105 amp hour, and you've got 135s, and you've got the very popular V5. They're just a dual battery. So what is a dual battery and what do you need to know? The first thing I say is let's go back to what you want it for. What do you want to do? If you just wanted to run a fridge and a couple of lights and occasionally go camping, then portability is probably a better thing because these you can use in more off-grid and commercial, or you can use in domestic use as a backup power. If you've got a dual battery setup in the vehicle, it's heavy, it stays in the car and that's all it does. It's only there as a backup or to be used for running auxiliary products. So like a fridge and so on. It's heavy, takes up room, and if you're going to put it in the back of the vehicle, then you're going to have less room for everything else. And that's typically the other reason that people just, think about, well, I'll put it off for the moment because what else is there? So these are designed to be put in by, and I'll be honest with you, a lot of our, including probably 50%, 60% of our customers are novices. And they use a Nomad product because we're trying to simplify and demystify. It's not a really difficult setup to have a dual battery. It simply takes the crank battery and then you've got an auxiliary battery and it says, okay, how are we going to charge that second battery? So we're going to have to connect it to that secondary battery and how we're going to do it. You're going to need to connect it with a DC-DC, which is obviously going to regulate the charge to the second battery. But how are you going to stop it from charging the second battery when your crank battery is basically when your car's not running? It's very, very simple. Don't get confused. When the car is off, you can use what's called a VSR. The VSR simply detects when the car's off and the current, or the voltage I should say, I'll get in trouble for saying that. When the voltage of the crank battery comes down, once it hits a certain point, this disconnects and won't let anything go through. So basically the water's coming down, hits this, and it's like a dam, just goes, shuts it off, and won't let it run through, and it won't let the dam run dry. That's all a VSR does, and it can also be referred to as a relay, depending on how old the electrician is you're talking to. So that there is a typical VSR, and it's nothing fancy. Probably 40, 50, 60 bucks. And a relay is probably the same. You can have a DC-DC like this. These are 20 amp. These are ones we do. This does not have a VSR. So you've got to have a VSR from the crank or the alternator, goes to this through the DC-DC and then connects to whatever battery you're going to run. This is lithium specific. It will have a wire in most cases like this, which is basically for if you have a smart alternator. Now, if you don't know what a smart alternator is, you don't need to know too much about it. It's simply your vehicle will have one or it won't. Just check with your manufacturer. You can Google most of them and find out whether you've got a smart alternator. And all that does, it's supposed to help, obviously, the crank battery to maintain its voltage and get better life out of the battery and use the battery availability current more efficiently. And they work really well. Older vehicles like, you might have an old Jeep or a Hummer or something like that, patrols, whatever, may not have a smart alternator and they may not need to have that wire connected. It'll just detect. So the other options you have, you can use these, which are quite smart, and these are a Matson, but you can use Energizer, you might use a Radar. Look, there's a number of different name brands out there, and all it does, it comes in here, it detects, it's got its own VSR built in. You put this somewhere out of the heat at the back where you're probably going to have your auxiliary battery, and you can have an auxiliary battery like this in the back or under your seat and not take up any space, and also because they're lightweight, then you don't have to upgrade your springs, and that's another thing people don't realise when they're looking at your batteries. They say, oh, so 120 kilos to get 100 amp or 120 amp AGM fitted and all the rest of it. Well, that's exactly right. If you're on the border of it, that can push it over. So the lithium's an option to keep the weight down, but also means you can pull these out if you need to. Even though this one's 14 kilo, this is an L series prismatic, top of the range. The one over here is a 135. Perfectly useful, still portable. That one weighs about 18 kilograms. So still light compared to an AGM, which is going to be 70 to 90, probably 100 for that one there. To get anything equivalent, it's going to be over 100 kilograms. So what's the alternative to a traditional dual battery setup where you're going to pay $3,500 to $5,000, and then you might get a situation where you want to add, like I said, the monitors and things in the dash, you're going to have additional wiring and work, and that's going to probably cost you an extra couple of grand. So obviously it gets a bit scary in cost wise. So these guys here, when you talk about a dual battery setup, we simply go and say, what do you want to use it for? And let's don't overcomplicate it. So if you just want to run a fridge and some lights, you say, okay, let's look at your car. Yep, we'll just say, look, get yourself a good DC-DC setup. And if you're going to use a solar panel, which we suggest, get something with a solar input. And that means you can get your solar panel, plug it into this unit. It'll do everything. It'll regulate everything and everything. Perfect for these things. Don't worry about it. The car's not running. The solar's going to kick in. The car is running. It'll work it out. And they're not expensive. And that's the thing is you should look at is go, and you're not going to spend anywhere near $3 grand to try and put a dual install in. So basically you need a cable from the crank battery to run through to basically your DC-DC here. And this will do everything for you. It'll have one cable or one little tiny lead running back for the ignition. Maybe if you have a smart, oh no, most cases you're going to have that. That's all a dual battery is. That's all a dual setup is. It doesn't have to be complicated. So you can put as much into these. These have a 50 amp input, 50 amp max output. So 50 amp input, you'll find that some of the larger DC-DC setups you have, that one there, the Matson, is a maximum of, they have a 40 amp and a 20 amp. If you've got a 40 amp, that's heaps. There's no point, if this takes 50, there's no need to try and put 60 amp in. It doesn't make it any better. Put a 40 amp in there, that's heaps. You're driving for 2 or 3 hours a day, well, that's going to have this full in an hour anyway. Don't worry about it. Because your fridge might only be drawing, if it's an efficient fridge, it might draw 1 amp an hour over 24 hours. So every night that thing's going to be full, might draw a little bit over it next day. You might have 2 days on site and then drive the next day for 2 or 3 hours. In 2 or 3 hours, you're going to be full if you've got a 40 amp. If you've got a 20 amp, then you're going to be 3 hours, you're going to put 60 amp back in. It's just about math, what's going in and what's going out. So demystifying it simply is, there's a lot of stuff that goes around and we get told a million stories and we say, why is it confusing? What do you want to run with it? Why do you need all this stuff hanging off the car and all these monitors and bits and pieces and interactive relays between all these different sources of charge points? All you do is create yourself a problem. Look, if you've got one of these, which is 105 or the 135, if you buy yourself a 40 amp one of these, probably cost you $400. Just get someone to wire up from the vehicle to the back and have a wide connected ignition and put an Anderson plug at the back of the vehicle, then plug your DC-DC into that and then plug it to one of these batteries and then you're done. It's not that hard. It's quite simple. You could do it yourself in probably an hour. If you can run the cable through the channels yourself, it's not very difficult. So it's not actually something that's very difficult. And what you'll find is you're going to be very careful when you're talking to the auto electricians. Make sure they understand the product and make sure they get the instructions, because 99% of the time that we have an issue, it's actually 100% of the time we have an issue, and it's related to something going wrong with this. It's a connection between the vehicle and the auxiliary power and what it's been charged with. 99% of the time, they're trying to overcharge it because the oil electrician says, oh, it should be able to handle this. It's not should be. All products are made differently, and they're made differently for reasons. So these guys have a 50 amp max input. If you try and charge it at 80 amp, it's not going to work. It's going to keep shutting down, and it'll actually trip out permanently and just go, we're not going to get charged, because it's not made to do that. If you want to run things like your, say your air pump or your winch and things like that, the best thing to do is run your vehicle and connect it to the crank battery with the car running if you want to run a winch and stuff like that. You don't run it off your auxiliary because it's not designed for that, unless you're running an AGM, etc., where you can do that. But you have to just remember is that why subject that to something you don't need to. If you're using this, like I said, what's the application that you want to use it for? If it's running a fridge, it's camping, forward driving, and just running your recreational needs, then just use it for exactly that. Run 2 fridges off and no problem. Run a wide lead, you can run 2 fridges, you can actually run 3. You would have seen some tutorials previously and podcasts where we run 3 or 4. We run 4 fridges off one of these. You can do that because we're not exceeding 50 amp output. 4 fridges probably at worst is going to get to about 30 amp, and that's running big fridges. That's fine. Just know what the limitations are and work between that. These guys here, when you're looking at joules, if you're going to look at, say, the large one, there's 135, that's a really great product. It's 48 mil thick, and you're probably going to have to run, you probably have to run 240 amp hour of AGM lead acid or gel, and that's going to probably be honest with you, probably 150 to 170 kilograms. Once you fit it in with brackets, and there's no space for them because at the end of the day they're going to be massive. Or you can do it like this and put it behind the back seat of one of your cabs, out of the way, and don't worry about it. The great thing about them too is that you've got Bluetooth app, and I don't have my phone with me, but these screens here, I'll turn that back on again, it'll kick back in about 5-10 seconds. What happens is everything on the screen, the state of charge screen, it'll show up on your phone. So instead of spending an extra couple of grand to get a monitor in your dash, when you pull this out or wherever you put it, it's going to give it to your phone. So you didn't have to spend any money on that. So basically, well under 2 grand, you can set yourself a full dual install up, state-of-the-art prismatic, and just over 2 grand if you run that with brackets and cabling, all the rest of it. You know, you're going to get well under 2.25 to run, you know, a big 135. Again, that depends on what you want to do with your dual. Again, don't overcomplicate. Keep it simple, and that's always the best solution, because every time you start complicating and cutting into existing wiring and do all these weird things, then weird things are going to happen. So a dual battery demystified is really simply what it does. A dual battery is there to run other auxiliary products, and you've got to look at, okay, what is the application for the auxiliary, and how do I charge it from my car? And you're going to use DC-DC, yep. You're probably going to need to have a VSR, and nowadays with the technology, you're probably going to go to a DC-DC with a VSR built in. Any of the big names will do it. Just ask for a DC-DC with a built-in VSR, and then it's all done in one go. Run the cable to the back, connect it with an Anderson, does all the regulating, and then it charges these guys here. Even can do the AGM and lead acid gel. You can do the same thing with those, it's no problem. Biggest thing with duals is about space, and the thing is about space and also weight. And what do you want to use that space for? Do you want to use it for just batteries, or do you want to use it for putting things like bedding, and you want to put fishing gear and, you know, fridging, or you want to put other surplus in there? So hopefully that assists you with understanding a little bit more about dual batteries, and that it's not actually a complex setup. You can keep it very, very simple, and you don't need to spend a fortune to get a really good high-end dual battery setup. So if you're not at all, if you are confused still, contact at nomadpd.com.au, and we can put you in touch with some of the suppliers that do installs, and then you can have a look at the installs they do. And look, they're also very fair and reasonable, and a lot of the big name suppliers will provide our product, and you'll be very actually pleasantly surprised that it's not as expensive as you might think. So hope that has educated a little bit about dual batteries and demystified a little bit. So again, talk again soon, but contact at nomadpd.com.au. Thanks.